I'm Jana with Purl Together, and in today's technique video I want to talk about jogless stripes. So what do I mean by a jog? Knitting in the round is knitting in a spiral rather than knitting in a ring and then stacking another ring on top of it perfectly even at the join. You're knitting in a spiral. So what happens is at the beginning and the end of that spiral, think about a slinky. It's got to start somewhere and it has to end somewhere, right? So when you have more than one stripe, you start your row of stripes and then you come around and then you're going to have a little jog where it's going to be like a little stair-steppy kind of thing. So let me show you. So I'm working on this sweater right here, and the beginning of the round has been conveniently placed underneath one of the arms. But you can still tell just a little bit where those stripes begin and end. Now, keep in mind, this hasn't been blocked, so things are a little wonky. But when you begin and end a new color, you're going to have this little jog, right? Hence the term. So you can do a number of different things to help mitigate that and lessen that row offset and make the colors match up a little more if you want to. So I'm going to give you my opinion about that first. Then I'm going to give you a couple of techniques to mitigate that if you choose to. So let me give you my opinion first about this. I don't think it matters all that much. Honestly, I really don't. I don't worry about it a whole lot. Now you can see it. You can see the jog if you're doing one row color switches. So you're getting a row of blue and a row of white, or a row of something, light and dark is specifically shows up that contrast. But when you're just, when you're doing rows of 4 or 5 or 6, like I am in this sweater, honestly, the beginning of the round is under the arm. So you're going to have to look pretty close to be able to see where those, now I haven't picked up the sleeve yet, but you're going to have to look pretty close to see where that jog is. Now, I'm holding this probably like literally 18 inches away from the camera, and it hasn't been blocked, so you can see some of those little airy spots where I've switched colors, and all that's going to block out. I can also manage that with some tension issues, and I'll show you that here in a few minutes. But my point is that that's going to be under my arm. Honestly, if somebody's that close to me looking at my knitting, they need to back off, right? Here's another thing. Like, we wear, I don't know, like if you think about a plaid shirt or any kind of a printed blouse with a pattern, like, do you double check that it all matches up before you buy it? Like, I've never even thought about that, to tell you the truth. Honestly, I've never thought about that. So here's one of my husband's shirts. Obviously, that doesn't match up on the back of the seam. And under the arm, this is like one of those, lined things that he wears in the winter. But like, that doesn't match up on the seam right there. I never even considered that until I thought about this video. Like, stuff that you buy at the store, it does not match up on the seams. Like, does anybody care? Like, that doesn't prevent me from buying a shirt or... Okay. Again, if it really bothers you, I will show you some ways that you can mitigate that offsetness with the rows. But honestly, like, can we just all get over our perfectionist selves? It's going to be just fine. You need to enjoy your knitting. And if it really super bothers you, then now by all means, fix it. But don't feel like you have to. Like, it's fine. And your knitting is wonderful. If it's a little wonk, it's okay. It's okay to just say, it doesn't bother me. I'm the boss of my knitting and I'm moving on. Good for you. That's what I'm going to do. So, however, I'm going to stop with my ranting about that here, and I will show you a couple of techniques where you can even that up just a bit if you want to. Before we get started with this week's technique video, though, I want to give a big shout out and a major thank you to a whole bunch of new people that have joined since last I thanked people. So I have like a bunch of people to acknowledge, and I really appreciate you becoming patrons and supporting the Purl Together YouTube channel, as well as the community as a whole. So your patronage is what keeps these videos coming each and every week, and I totally appreciate the support. If you're interested in supporting the channel, head over to patreon.com/Purl Together, and you can see what benefits I offer in trade for a small monthly pledge. Okay, so my heartfelt gratitude to Lorelei, Shirley, Jennifer, Robin, Janie, Stephanie, Val, Alexandra, Leslie, Athena, Kristen, Connie, Krista, and Susan. Thanks so much for joining us in the last 5-6 weeks. I really appreciate your support. All right, let's take a look at this swatch here that I'm doing. I'm just doing this for the sake of the video. This is not for the upcoming sweater knit along, but I thought these contrasting colors would illustrate really well how we knit in a spiral. So you can see on this row right here, I ended with the dark color and began with the light, and that's pretty apparent that there's a big jog right there. So there's a number of ways that we can mitigate that. So the first way I'm going to show you is simply to cut the yarn and start with the new color. And then once you have control of those tails, you can weave them in. I'm just going to cut this. I'll cut this white one down here. This goes to the, it ends right there, and I'll show you how we can mitigate that. And then I'm going to cut this darker color one as well. And then I'm going to show you a couple different things. First, we're going to start over again with the cream colored yarn. If I can find the end here, I have a little bit of a tangle. Okay. And we're simply just going to start knitting with it. I'm not going to tie it or do anything, out of the ordinary. All I'm going to do is begin knitting with it. I'm going to hold the tail with I'm just going to hold it down a little bit there with my left hand, just so I can get a little bit of tension to get started. And this is going to, the first stitch is going to be really loose and weird, and I like to leave a, that's probably 4 or 5 inch tail there that we can use to weave that in. So I'm just going to go around a couple of 3 or 4 rows, and then I'll show you how we can manage that jog simply with tension and with using a duplicate stitch to mitigate the little hole that occurs there, and then also the jog. And you can, definitely tighten that up so it's a little less awkward while you're working with it. So let me knit a few rounds and then I'll show you. Okay, I've only knitted 1 row around, and this darker stitch is really loose underneath here, so you can pull that tight and that will suck up this edge a little bit. And then you appear to have this hole here, and kind of you do, but it's okay. You're just going to keep knitting, and you can, now that you've knitted into that first stitch, you can take the white tail here and you can tighten that up, and that will make a big difference as well. So I like to just kind of hang on to that as I go by. And then we're going to, like I said, we're going to fix that tension issue and make everything tidier in just a moment. So while I'm knitting around here, I want to bring up a couple of things. There's several other techniques you can do out there that, include knitting into the row below, slipping a stitch up to mitigate, that step or that jog. But the reason I don't care for those necessarily is because when you just slip a stitch up or you knit into something below and pull it up, you may, depending on the technique we're talking about, you may end up with a column of stitches that only has 3 stitches instead of 4. Like in my case, I'm doing, in my case, I have 4 stitches in each stripe. So I don't like that necessarily, because then you have this weird elongated stitch coming from the row below, and maybe you only have 3 instead of 4 in that column. So honestly, that bothers me more than the jog does. But like I always say, you're the boss of your knitting. So what I like to do, if you're going to cut your tails, if you're going to cut your yarn between stripes, I'll show you how to manage that with the tension and with duplicate stitch and weaving it when you weave in your ends. But if you don't want a bajillion ends to weave in, you can also carry your yarn up and manage some of this jog with the tension while you're doing that. And that does take a little more practice, but that's part of the point of knitting a swatch, is that you have the time and you have the ability to practice managing these techniques while you're swatching with the yarn and figuring out what your gauge needs to be. All right, now obviously you can see the jog where I've cut the white yarn, you can see that stitch is loose and not very tidy. And then there'll be another jog up here. So what I'm going to do though is turn my swatch inside out. I mean, if I were doing this on a sleeve, for example, I would have bound off already, but I don't want to bind off just yet because I want to use the same swatch to show you another technique. And then we're going to compare. So I'm just going to turn this inside out so that we can go and take a look at the inside here. And where I've cut the yarn, you can see that this stitch, the big loopy bit right here, this is the last stitch that's elongated. And so I'm going to go ahead and, it's going to make a difference. It's going to make quite a difference to just snug that up. And same with the darker color. So I'm just going to, first I'm going to thread my tapestry needle or a darning needle. What's the difference between a darning needle and a tapestry needle? I feel like a tapestry needle maybe is the ones that have the curved tip, and a darning needle is the pointy ones without the curved. Maybe. Not sure. Okay. We're going to do this on the back side so that our duplicate stitch is not out in the front. So I'm going to turn this over though so it's easier to see where this white stitch goes. Okay. The one I'm pulling on is this loop right here. This is the stitch that we ended with. All I'm going to do here is go to the stitch to the left, this one right here, and I'm going to follow that loop all the way around. So I'm going to go in under the green yarn right here, and I'm going to go up into the next strand, and I'm duplicating, I'm following the path of the stitch that I'm tracing over. Okay, so I'm going to go in right there and underneath that green strand. It actually is kind of a dark turquoise, but it just the dark strand, it might not look the correct shade to you. So I've gone up and over this one, kind of matching. I want to match the tension as best I can to the stitch that I'm following. Okay, then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm following this loop over. I'm going to go underneath the dark strand again, up under the purl bump, and I'm tracing this specific loop up and around and over and down. Hopefully you can see that pretty clearly on the video. So I'm just duplicating the path of what's already here. Now I'm just going to do 3. I like 3. 2 is probably adequate, but I'm doing 3. Okay, so now I've done 3 stitches. Then I'm just going to weave in my end. So when I weave in the end, you can actually go and split the stitch right here, weave that in, and weave that in. There we go. Okay. Now when we turn that over and look, that made quite a bit of difference there. And some of that tension difference will block as well. But you can see where it's a little thicker here. That's where I've done the duplicate stitch. And again, you can mess around with the tension. It's going to be more accurate if you've actually cast off and you don't have a cable. But you're just going to do the same thing with the green one now as well. So that's how you would manage things. And that did lower, that lowered this and matched that up. That did change that. If you compare how that looks compared, to the one down below here, I think that did lower this here. So there's less of a jog on that one. Okay. Hopefully that made sense. As always, be sure to drop a comment down below if you have any questions. Okay, so I hope you found that video helpful. Again, I'm not going to worry about it a whole lot. You do you. You're the boss of your knitting. I hope you consider joining us on our upcoming knit along with the After the Rain sweater by Heidi Kermeyer. It's going to be a super fantastic knit along. If it's your first sweater, welcome. You can do stripes or not do stripes. So join me in the Facebook group and in the Ravelry group. I'll put a link down below with a wonderful podcast I did with Heidi, the designer of this sweater. And then also I'll put some links down below. You can still order yarn if you want. You may or may not receive it before we start swatching, but that's okay. Join us late. It's all right. It's totally fine. This knit along is going to be going on at least until the end of June, maybe a little bit longer, because it takes however long it takes. Okay, I hope to see you over in the groups. Thanks again for watching.